Good morning, friends. Welcome. This morning's presentation is on the creative power of imagination. Next week's Sundays will be on what is Theosophy. All work of this lodge is aimed at passing on, in their purity, teachings of the ancient message from the Masters of Wisdom that HPB named Theosophy. It is left to each of us in our own way to assimilate this powerful and common sense message, thus making it a living power in our lives. We all have a role in ushering in the golden age or postponing it with our every thought and action. Please help us with your attendance on Sundays at 11 a.m. or whatever you can do to keep alive and thriving these uplifting teachings that are necessary for the future of humanity. We are located in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area at 4865A Cordell Avenue, Suite 230, Bethesda, Maryland 20814. We are guided by the declaration that was used in establishing ULT in 1909, thereby returning the teachings to the lines laid down by the great founders of the Theosophical movement. To this end, we work independently and with each other to achieve a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. We hold the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, in similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching. We have neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers. The sole bond between its associates is the furtherance of unity. We regard as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And we welcome to our association all those who are in accord with the purposes of our declaration and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Today's reading is from the Voice of the Silence, starting on page 34. If thou wouldst reap sweet peace and rest, disciple, sow with the seeds of merit the fields of future harvest. Accept the woes of birth. Step out from sunlight into shade to make more room for others. The tears that water the parched soil of pain and sorrow bring forth the blossoms and the fruits of karmic retribution. Out of the furnace of man's life and its black smoke, winged flames arise, flames purified, that soaring onward neath the karmic eye, weave in the end the fabric glorified of the three vestures of the path. These vestures are Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Dharmakaya, robe sublime. The Shana robe, 'tis true, can purchase light eternal. The Shana robe alone gives the nirvana of destruction. It stops birth, but Olanu, it also kills compassion. No longer can the perfect Buddhas who don the Dharmakaya robe, glory, help man's salvation. Alas, shall souls be sacrificed to self, mankind, unto the wheel of units? Know, O beginner, this is the open path, the way to selfish bliss, shunned by the bodhisattvas of the secret heart, the Buddhas of compassion. To live to benefit mankind is the first step. To practice the 6 glorious virtues is the second. And now for today's talk, creative power of imagination.
We'll start today's talk with a couple quotes. Like the human mind, which is the exhaustless generator of ideas, the universal mind or space has its ideation, which is projected into objectivity at the appointed time, but the space itself is not affected thereby. Master K.H. The imagination is the picture-making power of the mind. In the ordinary average human person, it has not enough training or force to be more than a sort of dream, but it may be trained. When trained, it is the constructor in the human workshop. William Quan Judge. So then, each human being, from the savage to the sage, has these 2 powers of ideation and imagination. Also, he has a dual nature, the lower personal and the higher individual. Therefore, both ideation and imagination are also dual, higher and lower. Higher ideation and imagination work from within without, from individuality to personality. The lower work from without within, and not only fail to reach the higher, but burden the embodied soul with gross skandhas. The personal man's imagination is mostly composed of fantasy and fancy. It interferes with its labor of controlling, purifying and raising his thought and ideation. His ideation is subject to the inclinations of the senses, which cause impulsive speech and actions, and moods of doubt, laziness, and selfishness. The individual man's imagination is the plastic or creative power of the soul, Isis unveiled. It is called the master power in Ocean of Theosophy, and is described as one of the noblest faculties in man, Vernal Bloom's. It is the human soul, Manas, the thinker, aided by Buddhi, who uses imagination. Personal and lower ideation is the creative activity of the Skandhaic lives or the Tanaic elements. It is the faculty of vikalpa, rooted in sense longings or vasanas. Now, I think we need to say a few words about the skandhas here. I'll put them here on the board. The first one is rupa, which is form. The second one is vidana, which is perception. The third is sanjna, consciousness. Then comes sanskara, which is action. And the last one is Vidyana, which is knowledge. Okay. If you go to the dictionary, you will not find this. In HPB's explanations, skandhas are referred to as bundles. They're attributes, in other words. Everything that is finite, inapplicable to eternal or the absolute is composed of these. There are 5 exoterically and 7 esoterically. So what we talk about here is what she gave exoterically. And please remember that there is a higher form or inner meaning to all of these, which then composes the esoteric side of it. So these 5 unite at the birth of man and constitute his personality. This is, all of these constitute the personality. And we call them Skandhaic lives. And in the explanation that is given, they're Tanaic. It's this word. Tanaic lives. It's important to understand it because this is what causes problems for us. These elementals want to live. So they generate that repetitive thought in us that falls into grooves. We continuously think about similar things. So personal and lower ideation is the creative activity of the Skandhaic lives or the Tanaic elementals. All our attributes are made of those. So it is the faculty of fantasy, vikalpa, rooted in sense longings or vasanas. Indulge in without a proper check and used unconsciously, fantasy then in time becomes automatic and ultimately is consciously indulging. So what does this correspond with? This activity then corresponds with the astral light. It's the lower memory related to the astral light. All these are within the astral light. So that is what this involves. Astral light. And we all participate in it. Individual or higher ideation is the creative activity of the monastic ego, by which he influences, impresses, and inspires the personality. It is the true imagination or sankalpa, and we can glimpse its character in the old expression kalpana taraka sakti of the Raja Yoga system. Now if you look those words up, kalpana is creativity and imagination, taraka is the star or savior, and sakti is force or power. So the yoga system composes all those 3. This power of the higher ideation and imagination creates images by will, thought, feeling, or aspiration. So I can't put anything else on this board. May I take it off? ideation, said astral. But the higher, where the power of imagination creates images by will, thought, feeling, or aspiration, corresponds to the higher divine astral, which she called in the secret doctrine Akasha. And sometimes it has an age, sometimes it does not. So Akasha then is the celestial library of living forms of pure wisdom. The personal man has remembrance and recollects what he has forgotten by the help of the lower memory of the astral light, exercised mostly unconsciously because it becomes an automatic activity. The individual human soul connected with the Akasha, the celestial Akasha, has the faculty of reminiscence. When the personal man learns to lean more and more on the individual, conquering the lower and extricates himself from karma, he attains that state which is called antatkaranic being and has access to pure knowledge which is imprinted in the Akasha. And through this process, he can train his imagination correctly to do what? To create images. It gives you the power to create images by will, thought, and aspiration. So, this is the metaphysical aspect of the philosophy. Ideation and imagination then are like the two wings of a bird. They enable us to lift up or drop down. So, going down is descending to the lower levels, and ascending is to the heavenly heights, which is Akasha. These two wings are wisdom and compassion for the individual, and worldly knowledge and worldly love for the personal man. The higher two form the heart doctrine, and the lower pair makes for head learning. So wisdom and compassion makes the higher, and worldly knowledge. This is called book learning, I think, in our age. Knowledge and worldly love, human love. This is the higher, this is the lower. The personal man is involved with this, the individuality, individual with the higher two. Heart, head. So the higher two is described as the heart. Egotism, pride, and possessiveness spring from head learning and worldly knowledge, and that is what creates the great heresy. What is the great heresy? She explains it in the secret doctrine, but also voice of the silence refers to this. This causes separativeness, separative thought, and that is what is the great heresy. Not that the lower self is, but that it considers itself separate from all of the other cells, lower cells. Altruism, humility, and generosity spring from the heart wisdom, which is the divine wisdom of that great fraternity composed of the United Lodge of the Adepts. So then when we compare it this way, we see that man stands between the demoniac and the divine. Lower ideation and imagination goes towards the lower demoniac, and if you persist in it, HPB refers to it as the soulless man, which is the denizens of Avicii. And so with the higher ideation and imagination, man's nature becomes divine. If he perseveres in developing his divinity, he becomes as newly born, enters the path, learns to liberate himself from the delusions of the lower, and to tread the Paramita path of renunciation and compassion, and dons the Nirmanakaya robe of supreme glory, which was referred to in the voice of the silence. The Skandhaic ideation expresses itself in selfish feelings, in separative thoughts, and the speech of the worldly type, whether it is diplomatic or devilish, and in acts of rivalry and competition performed with a view to gaining possession of what others own. His thought images are as hard as iron, turbid in color, harsh in tone, chaotic in character, and they have the power to entangle him more and more as he goes along. Right thoughts and right feelings naturally evolve from without, which is then producing all correct speech from without. The center around which right speech revolves is hinted at that theosophical statement which says, "Thus have I heard." Right thought and right feeling, regularly and perseveringly maintained, naturally leads us to seek the writings of Theosophy. There is not a subject, not a problem, not an event on which Theosophy does not offer right knowledge. Therefore, the practitioner must seek for knowledge heard from Theosophy at every turn and every hour of his life. That a statement, "Thus have I heard," is far-reaching in its meaning. The habit of seeking every time what others have heard, read, learned, taught is important and necessary. It saves us from pitfalls. It enables us to understand. It teaches us how to resolve conflicts of duties and to perform our own dharma. It leads us to the great liberating idea of doing deeds, right deeds, without creating further bondage. So then the right imagination enables us to trace every deed to its archetypal soul. Every deed has an archetypal soul. I'd like to put a couple of these on, put these on the board. When understood, we can change our own personality in the direction that it needs to be changed. So, waking and sleeping. Eating and exercising. Bathing. And dressing. Talking. Listening. Okay. So, what is that representative of? How about manifestation and non-manifestation? waking and sleeping, manifestation, non-manifestation. Remember, when we go to a longer sleep, that is the Devacanic interlude. And when the universe goes to sleep, it becomes pralaya. Eating and exercising. Soul learning and soul assimilation. So, we are constantly reading, learning Theosophy and other literature similar to it, and we're assimilating it. So, eating and exercising is just that, it's assimilation. Bathing and dressing, sacred bathing, which is baptism, and the explanation in the Secret Doctrine about Jesus being initiated in one of the Egyptian temples, pyramids, is good reading for anyone. And then we just read in the Voice of the Silence, donning clothes of right morality and ultimately donning the robes of glory. These are all interrelated, but when we are doing these daily, I don't think we think it's higher aspects. And what about talking and listening? Well, what is the motto in Theosophy? Learn it so you can give it. So talking is necessary in giving it. What kind of talking? Purposeful talking. What about listening? In the Voice of the Silence, we're told we're eventually to become listener, Shravakas. So that means that the inner world that we want to enter, that we see through a film at first, or a colored glass, we're talking about theosophical writings, need to become sharp and clear. And this is the path of achieving that. Because what we see through the glass eventually becomes a realization for us that we're looking through that colored glass, and we need to make it clear. So this inner path then clears it. It's an inner path. So that listener, why is that important? Because until we learn to be quiet and absolutely attuned to our center ourselves, we're not listeners. And the inner ear can only hear it in quietude. To the inner ear, then the Voice of the Silence will talk, and that inner ear then also hears the master, it be internal or external. So in this philosophy then, it is important to understand this process. Sacramental deeds is what then we perform once we understand what this process is. Enables us to grow in holiness because we are purifying ourselves as we go along, and the imagination faculty grows stronger. At this stage, there is a danger, and that danger is memory or remembrance of the mundane and forgetfulness of the spiritual. Because automatically we go with this, but it needs to be automatically the inner senses, the archetypal ones. So then, a few more comments. Ordinarily, each human being then considers himself or herself as the center of the universe, and that everything else revolves around that personality. In other words, our personality assumes that it is the center personality. Assumes that it is the center. And that everything else is revolving around it. But what is the center of our universe? The center of our universe is the central spiritual sun. we all evolve or come from this spiritual center. And we always depict it this way. Each ray comes from that same center, and when ready, in other words, when the evolutionary process is completed, after the soul waking to its inner life, it returns to that center. But if we assume, as the personality does, that it is the center, it actually interferes with it. And I'm reading this from one of the quotations. It says, this conception of ourselves as the center influences blatantly or subtly our thoughts and imaginings, and hence our action. Blatantly, when we clamor for our rights or are nakedly selfish or self-assertive. Subtly, when we conceive greatly of ourselves as philanthropic or as dutiful, and are incapable of such imaginative entry into the life of another, that his moral failings and his sufferings are stabbed at our heart. So then this process has to be reversed. The personality is not the center of the universe. It just assumes that position. So we have to put the individuality at the center of the universe and follow that inner guide. Only then can we place ourselves with imaginative clarity as to where the other person is and what their needs are. We in Theosophy talk about studying the philosophy, learning it, assimilating it, cultivating all of the virtues in providing service to others, and being able to teach others. So once this position is taken, only then can the imaginative faculty assist us as to where the other person's heart and needs are. There's an article where HPV, this is I think HPV article, where she talks about Leo Tolstoy being able to do this perfectly well every time. When he came into contact with other people, he could place himself in their place and knew exactly where they stood and what their needs were. So this then reversal has to take place. Only when we consciously undertake it can we cultivate it. Imagination should be potent help in every event of our lives. First in the formation of correct concepts, and then in action in terms of these. Imagination should not mean the creation of fantasies. To give a form to our thought, which we sense intuitively in our contemplation, is okay, but we must avoid the temptation to materialize that which transcends the grasp of finite minds. We are warned not to imagine or try to imagine what the causeless cause, the one reality beyond the range and reach of thought, is. For this reason, the secret doctrine becomes very important to read, because it gives many different symbols and suggestions, pregnant passages which break constantly the molds of thought in which our minds will set themselves. This is the ordinary mind, the lower, constantly putting itself in a groove, and we all do it because we have given that input to it, and it automatically falls into those grooves. To get it out of those grooves, the imaginative faculty has to be cultivated. we have to put aside all preconceived ideas and learn what Theosophy has to say about God, law, being, karma, reincarnation, and soul, examining carefully each aspect of the teaching, and also trying to compose those teachings as a whole in our mind, so that we can be cleansing the mind of the anthropomorphic ideas. Then we can step into that everyday I to dwell with mind and heart upon such symbols as the Atma, as the spiritual sun. And HPV refers to the Atma in all of her writings. Thus the imagination can be lifted above the distorted pictures of the astral light to the Akashic records provided by those who at any time have helped on the spiritual evolution of mankind. Then our lives embody perception of the universals, and we're removed from fantasy to the realization of the self. We will conclude with a quote from HPV's Psychic and Noetic Action, remembering that esoteric psychology is recondite. What is given in simple outline, we must remember always have deep esoteric aspects. Quotation: the higher ego cannot act directly on the body, as its consciousness belongs to quite another plane and planes of ideation. The lower self does, and its action and behavior depend on its free will and choice as to whether it will gravitate more towards its parent, the Father in heaven who is in the heart, or the animal which it informs, the man of flesh. And now we will stop here and open it for questions and comments.
You mentioned something about knowledge and knowledgeable people, paying attention to them. I think I interpret in context paying attention to what others, where they're at. But also there are people that talk a lot about the secret doctrine to the point by where, in some circles you can't not even find it. Is it okay to, it gets a little deep in some places for some people. Is it okay to go ahead and just pay attention to what they're saying about it?
Well, there's an RC article where he says there are theosophists by name and theosophists by nature. Now, we here are not discussing theosophists by name, people who call themselves theosophists, but neither study the philosophy as given by the masters, and they also fit into it whatever they wish to fit into it. At this stage, we have to ask the question as to who are the true students who stay with this philosophy. We are not here to say follow whoever comes your way. We're talking about those individuals who have or shown that they are the exemplifications of that true nature through their work, through their talks, through their defending the philosophy all through the ages. Not that Theosophy needs any defense, because it stands on its own merits. Truth always stands on its own merits. But if you're reading the real books versus the ones that have been changed, your ideology would also be accordingly changed. So when we are talking about it from the platform of the ULT, we're talking about the true teachings of Theosophy and the expounders of that philosophy only, not people who have, with their brain power, changed the content of the books. We're not talking about them. We're talking about the true philosophy here. Those who have gone before us, the true students whose nature is that of a theosophist, those are the ones that knew or know. And we have to use a gauge there as to who knows and who doesn't know. We cannot accept that everyone is on the same wavelength here.
You kind of alluded to that when you talked about, you know, higher knowledge and brain power. I think would be what, lower?
Yeah.
On the aspect.
Intellectual is lower.
So how do I distinguish between the two?
Very simple. We just discussed in this here as to what the character is of those who show one or the other. What is here? We said the higher two, wisdom and compassion, formulate the heart doctrine. How does it show itself? In altruism, humility, and generosity, and correct speech. And the other, which is the worldly knowledge and worldly love, shows itself in egotism, pride, possessiveness. So when you look at people, surely you can see some of those characteristics exhibited. A lot of the, how should we say it, because we're not finger pointing at anyone at this stage, this is the 21st century, but even at HPV's time, all of the prominent students are the ones that really caused havoc with the movement, because they all wanted title, position, and power. So it's very obvious, you can tell who those are. What the student covets is to be nothing in the eyes of the world. And you can tell those in these, they're totally different from one another. Remembering that also that these sometimes come in dove form, dove, sheep's clothing, she calls it. Because remember, those who want to destroy it are also working within. They're not on the outside anymore. They have infiltrated into it. And those you can also see. We all have perceptive powers. We have to use them. Because that is how Masonry was destroyed from within out. They infiltrated, the Jesuits infiltrated into the Masonic lodges and brought about higher degrees, nullifying the knowledge that was being transferred to all those in it. And they also infiltrated into the last head of the Mason's household, and it was a king, and he was poisoned. So those in sheep's clothing also work within. So we need to be very careful as to who we are believing and who we are following. The true students of Theosophy are there because their nature is Theosophy. they're trying to find their positions in the movement correctly, how to serve, how to become useful to it in the master's program. Yes.
At the beginning and throughout, even now, I think we're discussing within to without, without to within.
Mm-hmm.
Even when you talk about the society, you want without to come to within, right? People who are being introduced to society, you want them to be a part of it, to become within. And similarly, Theosophy, these books, at the surface, it's without. You read it and you assimilate within, or you awaken something within.
Correct.
So there's this constant interplay without, within, without, within. So I guess I'd like us to explore more how that interplay works, because at the beginning you said, it has to be within to without,
Mm-hmm.
but you sometimes need help of without to awaken the within. So we have these forms, these people, gurus or leaders that can inspire you to awaken the within.
Okay.
So we're living in this external world, and how I guess we should selectively work with the external world so that it can help us. Maybe we can explore that.
Okay. So, a question is this interactive process of external to internals, and how do we clarify what comes in and how we use it? Again, here is individuality and personality. The individuality is the higher aspect, the triad that goes from life to life. This individuality is the witness that has been through all of your incarnations, because it's on a continuum. The personality is for one life period, does not remember, but the individuality does. That higher self is not in a form, it's formless. It's formless. You might call it light energy, or spiritual energy, you can name it deity, it's the same thing. So this individuality knows, is the knower, is the perceiver in you. Or the other way.
But that should not be mixed with the skandhas that we mentioned at the beginning.
The skandhas are all your lower aspect.
Right, but when
okay?
you say knower, perceiver, that's knowledge and perception, which are skandhas. Am I not correct?
It's the lower aspect of
Okay.
it, not the higher. This knower looks at ideas directly. Is the knower. It knows exactly what it is, not the personality. So this knower is you, because what is the other stuff we talked about? The attributes. It's the Bego attributes, the lower skandha. That's not who you are. You cannot assume to be the skandhaic elementals. They're there. They have been there because they get attracted to you in each lifetime. Until you purify them and make it part of this. You're going to lift them up, in other words. Those lives are points of energy. You have automatically, continuously impressed them that way. They have your electrical impress, electromagnetic impress on it. So you attract them back to yourself. Your job is to uplift them, to make them pure, what they were at the beginning, because it's your imprint they're carrying. So you have to make them beneficent, and when all of this becomes beneficent, what have you become? You have become a perfected human being. But in the meantime, this is who you are. HPB says we constantly identify with the personality, but the personality, we just said what it was. All these bundles of attributes, bundles or groups of attributes, everything finite, inapplicable to the eternal and the absolute. This is eternal. The other, the attributes that we put up here, rupa, vidana, sanjna, sanskara, vidyana, are not permanent aspects of you. They're simply attributes that compose your personality in each lifetime. And depending what you have come to do, those are the things that you have to purify in yourself to be able to see the inner life. Where we are referring to knowledge, the knowledge is within you. All this stuff in the secret doctrine and ISIS and all the other ones are inside of you. They're not out there. You're simply awakening that reality within yourself. You want it to come through you, but it's there. You're not, it seems like you're putting it in when you read it because it taps your consciousness on the physical plane. So you're awakening that reality within yourself by study and assimilation. But the knowledge is inside. It's not exterior to yourself, it's on the inside.
Can't you expand that to other actions like eating? Can you treat that as awakening you to higher? Like everything has an eternal essence.
Yeah,
right? So the
archetypal.
yes, so
We just put it on here. We said that it's archetypal. Also reminds you, we said waking and sleeping, manifestation, non-manifestation. Because every day we go through the cycle. How thankful are we when we eat? Are we eating in a positive manner in the sense that you're thankful to the lives that compose the food that you're eating, to the person who prepared it, to the one who brought it to the market, to the one who grew it on the farm? This is a chain of people in service to feed us, and that gratitude has to be in the heart, or we are automatically just eating without thinking. It's important to think of the ideal or the archetypal because it has those higher levels. Bathing, donning right clothes, sacred bathing. Every morning it says you have a new possibility in front of you. You have a new mantra, in other words. That single day might be the only one you have, but it composes a mantra for all of the lives that compose it. So when you take a shower, are you expressing gratitude to the water elementals? Because they're sacrificing themselves for us all the time. In other words, what does Buddha call that? Being mindful. Are you mindful of your environment and all those elements that go into it to make you live through that particular day?
And that's how we purify ourselves, perfect
Exactly.
ourselves.
You're imprinting that gratitude onto those lives and thinking of their archetypal examples as to what they represent. Because these lives are light energy, they're pure. They come from where? The logoic center. And they're pure spiritual energy. Akasha, she says, divine Akasha. So that the upper aspect is divine. The lower aspect is infernal because we make it so. Because we have forgotten who and what we truly are. So all this has to be reversed. We cannot identify with the personality. I have a name, I do have a form, I keep it in good order, clean, well maintained, physically, mentally, psychologically, because a clear mind is necessary for understanding this philosophy. So the right food has to be taken in with kindness and with mindfulness. So all this enables us to purify that lower self. And its purification is what enables the light to shine through. It's there. First we have to acknowledge that it's there. and then cultivate the lower nature to become antatkaranic, that bridge, in other words, of self to the higher self. In time, I think it was a poem this student read where it said, the person comes and knocks on the door for entrance. What is the entrance meaning here? The higher life. And the inner voice says, who is there? And the person knocking says, it is I. The door closes totally, so no entry is provided. A couple of years or sometime later, after this purification process has gone on for a while, the individual comes again knocking at the door. The inner voice asks, who is there? And the answer from the individual is, it is thou. Thou art that. So these statements have tremendous inner meaning if we were to understand them, and its application is what opens the door. Here's the individuality. We have to identify with the individuality, because this is the only thing in us that is permanent, and it is pure. It is on a continuum because it goes from life to life, but the personality has to attune itself to it. It is, we just read, the higher ego cannot act directly on the body, as its consciousness belongs to quite another plane and planes of ideation. The lower self does, and its action and behavior depend on its free will and choice as to whether it will gravitate towards the father, the individuality, or the animal, which informs in the physical form. So that's what we have to do.
So I'm hearing hope and responsibility all the time.
Hope and responsibility.
We can gravitate down or up.
It's our
for
free
life
choice.
Tomorrow and for the next incarnation.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that there aren't those noble souls out there who have the benefit of humanity at heart, if we can find them. Now, the student asked about gurus. HPV says, in the 21st century, every human being is their own authority, that you cannot put another human soul over yours. Because why? First of all this knowledge is free. And if somebody is going to charge money, then you immediately know it isn't the right knowledge that you're seeking. Same with gurus. A guru is someone that you will notice when your internal life has sorted itself out. In other words, that statement in the voice where she says, all of your senses are coordinated. Touch, hearing, smelling, all of it, and it turns into what? Inner touch. It's coordinated and coalesced into a unit, in other words, synthetic whole, and she calls it the inner touch. Inner touch. So when you are ready, the guru appears. You don't have to go out there looking for one, truly, because the guru will come to you. Why?
There's lots of people that might say, I'm your guru.
Well, she says don't believe them because they're false gurus. The gauge is that when you are ready, the guru acknowledges you. It's not the other way around, you going looking outside. It doesn't mean that there are noble souls out there who are helping people move forward. She says there are noble souls in the movement as well as noble souls outside of the movement, and that all those noble souls who earn the capacity for help with their effort and service to humanity receive it, whether they know it or not. Okay, thank you very much. Next week's talk will be on what is Theosophy. Please join us then.